Hey guys, how's it going? So, I've been digging into the 32X library, and some of the games are kind of good. I mean, there's a few underrated gems, and the 32X has a very weird history. So, before we go into the games, let's just talk about the history for a second. I think the late Sega Genesis life cycle and the whole Sega Saturn era is just kind of weird, you know? Like, I feel like late into the Genesis era, Sega was just throwing anything at the wall that would stick. In the Sega Saturn, don't even get me started with the Sega Saturn. I mean, not to go on a side tangent, but I think Sega kind of hit its peak with the Sega Dreamcast. You know, I respect the Sega Genesis, but the Dreamcast has to be the best Sega console ever. Look, enough about the Saturn, enough about the Genesis, enough about the Dreamcast. We're here to talk about the 32X. So enough bullshit, let's get started.
Sega Genesis 32.
Welcome to the next level.
POV. It's 1994. The Sega Genesis, the Super Nintendo, both of them in its prime. But then here comes the Atari Jaguar. And then there's news of a console from Sony. Now this kind of had Sega shaking in its boots a little bit. So Sega of Japan and Sega of America had two different ideas. Sega of Japan wants to make the Sega 32X its own console, and actually here's a few photos of it. It's called the Sega Neptune. And Sega of America wants to make it an add-on. Of course, they were for the add-on, and that's how the Sega 32X was made. So, like I said before, the Sega 32X had some decent games, but man, this thing is fucking weird. It's a mushroom. And let me explain how you put this together, right? So, like, in a Sega Model 2, you just hook it up, you good to go. But in a Sega Model 1, and if you had the Sega CD on top of that, it's a fucking mess. But that's not the worst part. If you had a Model 1 Sega Genesis, you needed metal prongs to make the 32X work. Worst part is though, if you have a 32X, a Sega Genesis, and a Sega CD, and it's a Model 1, and I can't believe they made this, you're gonna need a Sega power strip. Sega! Enough weirdness, enough Sega. Let's just talk about the games of the 32X. So, the Sega 32X has a very limited library, but there's two great gems that I want to talk about. And yeah, pretty much, you guys know one of them, but there's one really underrated game I want to talk about, and it's Tempo. Now, Tempo's a great game, and I do want to talk about it, but before we get into that, let's just look at the American box art for a second. For context, Tempo looks nothing like this. Here's what Tempo looks like. And here's the box art. It's kind of like that Kirby thing, where like in Japan box art he looks happy, he's smiling, he's doing this thing, but in American box art he looks angry, tough, and all that. But this is really exaggerated. Now, you've seen the American box art, let's look at the Japanese box art. You see what I mean? But listen, enough about comparing box arts or whatever, all that matters is the game. Now the game is honestly really fucking good. The Tempo's thing is all about music, You essentially go about levels, and do you think it's honestly a really good platformer, It's not necessarily like Sonic. I can't really compare it to anything since Tempo's kind of its own thing. So the first thing I want to talk about with this game is that it kind of has that Rain Man effect where it's, fluid like a cartoon. I mean, shit, it kind of looks like the game is pushing the 32X. So you know how Mario has stars and Sonic has the Master Emeralds? Well, Tempo has this. Yeah. Overall, though, the game is honestly really, really good. I mean, I wouldn't recommend getting it for a real 32X, but if you could pop it in an emulator, I would really give this game a shot. So Knuckles Chaotix. This is weird how it's kind of Knuckles' only game. I mean, it makes sense, but the thing that has me is that, for the Sega Genesis, you got Sonic 1, 2, and 3. For the Sega CD, you got Sonic CD, but no Sonic for the 32X. I mean, hey, I get it. I like Knuckles Chaotix, but no Sonic game? Either way, though, Knuckles Chaotix is fucking great. Obviously, like any game that goes to stop Eggman. And this game has a very weird concept. So, Chaotix. Basically, throughout the gameplay, you're tethered to an AI like SPO or Vector, and it's momentum-based gameplay. Like, since you're tethered to either SPO or Vector, you could use that momentum to, do things. Either way, though, ladies and gents, if you want to, like, subscribe, do whatever you want to do, no rush, and tell me down below, what's your favorite 32X game? I'll see you guys later. Peace.